Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I know it's a beautiful day out there, so we appreciate you spending some time with us online for this next webinar. For those that don't know me, I'm Aaron Lepland, the Deputy Director at the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, or CLCC for short. We are the umbrella organization for Connecticut's land trusts, and we support your work through policy, advocacy, funding, technical assistance, and capacity building programs like this one. Today's presentation is the fourth and final installment of our webinar series designed to equip Land Trust board members and staff with the tools and strategies needed to build strong and sustainable fundraising programs. CLCC offers many programs like this throughout the year, and so if you don't already, I encourage you to subscribe to our e-news because it's a great way to stay clued into upcoming programs. A few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. Throughout the presentation, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll definitely have time at the end for a Q&A. To help preserve bandwidth, we do ask that you stay muted and keep your video off until we're doing that Q&A session. And then just also note that we are recording and we'll be sharing this recording and the slides with you all in the next couple of days. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce our presenters, Sharon and Paul. Both of them have been working in the nonprofit fundraising space for decades and together have raised more than $2 billion. So please join me in welcoming Sharon and Paul.
Hi, Erin. Thank you so much. And we have really enjoyed these sessions with you all. And we're really excited about this last session, Anatomy of a Capital Campaign. One of the things that we have felt is that, a lot of times land trusts are put into the situation of quote unquote panic fundraising. You've got a piece of property available, and all of a sudden you've got to reach out to your major donors, find who those major donors are to see if they will, make a down payment so at least you can secure the property, and then heaven forbid, should two properties come up, because then it becomes even more challenging. We'd like to suggest a slightly different way of doing this. So, Paul, if you could advance the slides. A capital campaign is a way of building reserves that will be there when a potential property comes available. It's a way of building reserves for stewardship. Should there be some catastrophe that requires you, to do some significant work on a trail. It's a way of having the funds so that you're not in a situation of panicking. We will talk to you about what a capital campaign is and how to actually go about raising money through a campaign. So what can you expect of a campaign? Number one, campaigns are like nothing else in fundraising. They are structured and methodical in their price. You do A, B, C, D, F in that order, and you will raise the money. They're in response to an urgent need. They're not to cover your year to year operations. So, regular trail maintenance, education programs, paying for an executive director, these are not included in a capital campaign. I also like to say they employ common sense, but I'm going to put a little caveat around it because when you're in it, I often hear people say to me, well, shouldn't we do this? Or why shouldn't we go public? Or, why shouldn't we let more people know about it? So, common sense is common sense only if it's common to you. Once you're in a campaign, it's like, yeah, that makes total sense why we don't do this now. So, when you're in it, it's like, it's very, stepwise, it's very linear. They require commitment and determination. So you can't have seven things, major things going on in your organization at the same time that you're doing a campaign. It requires all of your board, all of your volunteers to be involved in this campaign for it to really be successful. And I think the last thing is it's a marathon. You're running 26.5 miles. You're not sprinting 10,000 feet. So you've got to really think about the finish line and keeping your eyes on the finish line. Finally, I want to say people want to help. They're just waiting to be asked. And it's our job to ask them. And a campaign is a great way to do so. So, what do you need for a campaign? Case for support. What are you raising money for? I'm going to kind of chuckle here because this is the most difficult question to answer. What do you need the money for? Explain to me how you're going to use this money. I don't know why it's hard, but it is. But that's essentially what the case for support is doing. Why should people give? It's your justification to your donors of who you are, why you have a great track record, what that track record is, and what money you need to raise and how you will be using it for the future. Second, you need donors willing to give. You need a strong prospect list. So there is kind of a back of an envelope formula that fundraisers will use when evaluating whether or not an organization can go into a campaign. Typically, a capital campaign, someone giving to a capital campaign, will double what they give to an annual fund multiplied times five. So if someone gives $1,000 a year, they'll likely give a campaign gift of 10,000 a year. So if you are raising $100,000, a year, chances are you can go into $1 million campaign. Now, again, I'm going to put a little bit of a caveat with it for all of you as land trust, having worked with land trust for, 20 years now. I know you're not always asking for money, and I know you're not always asking for significant major gifts. You're asking primarily for membership. And membership is not a good gauge of what someone will give. As Paul has talked about in the past several sessions that we've had, this is where your prospect research really comes into play, is finding the donors. And the third thing that you need in a campaign is people willing to ask. So if you don't ask, you don't get. And so you have to have people who are willing to ask for money. But again, in the campaign process, people can be trained on how to ask for money. People never go alone, they always go in pairs. You're never, ever, 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 ever making a cold call. It is always to someone who knows you, has affinity for what you do, who is understanding, what your goal is. So it's someone who is very sympathetic and is likely to give you a gift. So that's what you need for a campaign. Now, your case for support is a rousing call to action, combination of heart and sound investment. So, vision and challenges. What do you hope for with this initiative? Why is it needed? What are the challenges that you're facing? Who's going to benefit if you give this money? Why do you need it now? And why your organization? These are the questions you need to answer, as well as what specifically are you proposing? What do you plan to do? What will be the benefits? Why is it an urgent need? The next thing you need to look at is, Paul, project description. So if you're building a building, why do you need a building? If you are, want to purchase additional land, why do you want to purchase additional land? How will this change things from what they are? How does it meet the need that you're talking about? And finally, you need a budget. Planning, building, startup costs, fundraising, whatever it is, you need a budget. All of that and the kitchen sink goes into the case for support. I like to think of the case for support as being able to answer every question a donor will have. We spend a lot of time on the case for support during a campaign because if you don't have a case that resonates, you will not have a campaign. It's as simple as that. All right, the donor list. So as I said, Paul and his group do a great job at prospect research. You have to do the prospect research. You have to analyze your own database. Who are your current major donors? Who are people who are members who have capacity but are underperforming in terms of what they're giving to you? You need to what we call do qualify with a rate and review. I often ask you to pull your 70 to 100 best donor prospects. If you can run your database through a wealth engine and identify those who, maybe aren't giving to you now, but have high affinity propensity and capacity, a few of those can be thrown in. And typically, anywhere from 20 to 40 people will be interviewed during what we call the feasibility study to see whether your campaign is viable. And then step three, we'll conduct the feasibility study. So the feasibility study is a personal survey to assess the readiness to undertake the campaign, readiness of your donors, and readiness of you as an organization. So what we do is we interview the donors that were going to be your best donors, and we say, so what do you think of, the organization? How long have you been involved with them? What do you think of the direction, this land trust is going in? How well do you think they're being run? How well do you think they're being managed? Where do they stand in terms of your philanthropic priorities? Then we move on to the case for support. What was your perception of the case? Did you have any questions? Where was it strongest? What do you think is the most compelling reason someone might support this case? Can you think of anything that could be make the case stronger? Um, and then the final thing we do is we actually ask people, so if this campaign were to move forward, would you support it? If yes, what range might you consider? So to get ready, we define your objectives, we select the people to be interviewed, we review the questions, and then we take the case and we take a personal letter, send it out to the donors that you want to be interviewed, then follow up and ask them whether or not they will be interviewed. So I kind of skipped ahead of myself a little bit, but that's okay. I get excited when talking about feasibility studies. So perception of the organization, perception of the case, financial support, and then we also ask the people who are being interviewed whether or not they would like to help out raising funds for this campaign. I will tell you, typically, could you go back a sec, Paul? When it comes to financial support, we typically find at least 80% of those interviewed will support this campaign and they will share with us how much. If we find less than that, then chances are we don't have a viable campaign. And you don't want to go into a campaign that won't be successful. Truly, it can do lasting harm to your organization for a number of years. So, looking at and potential leadership, about 40% usually of those people we interview say, yeah, I'd love to help out with this campaign. So it builds, in this process, builds your campaign cabinet. So when we finish the feasibility study, the deliverables are recommendations on whether or not to proceed with a campaign. Of all the campaigns, Paul has done and I have done, there have only been a handful that aren't ready. Usually, when we meet with an organization, we try to vet the organization pretty well before going into a feasibility study. What I've found is a few of clients that we've taken on have said, we want to try anyway. And in that case, it's a good feedback and it's a real help to the organization. We also identify areas which need to be refined, changed, or further developed. Where are there weaknesses in the case? And where are their strengths and how can we build upon those? We identify potential leadership and we project a reasonable campaign goal. So we look at the feedback from the feasibility study and then look at the rest of your database, look at donor prospects, and come up with a feasible goal. We are very conservative in our goals. And I think every campaign I've ever, almost every campaign has always exceeded its goal. And then we have a plan of action that to raise the funds for the campaign plan. I want to share with you a gift table, but one thing on the prior chart, if we find that your campaign is not viable, we don't go, sorry, bye-bye. Rather, we put a plan together that will help you make a campaign viable. I remember one land trust I was working with in northern Massachusetts did not, I mean, they did have a strong donor base, but the main concern among their donors, and these are a couple of people who have been giving them, who had given $1 million and were ready to give another million, but felt that the entire organization was dependent on the executive director, and it was not sustainable unless if that executive director should leave. So they expected a plan to be put into place for succession planning and to build a bench and to strengthen the board. That wasn't an easy message to give to the executive director. But at the end of the day, I'll never forget, she called me 2 years later and said, "We've made all the changes and we're ready to launch the campaign," and it was successful. So sometimes what we're finding is not yet. It's never a not ever. So that's an important thing, that even if the campaign is not seen to be viable at this stage, it is still a tremendous evaluation of what you need to do to strengthen your organization. All right. Now on to the gift table. So, if we're looking to raise $10 million, you can see right here that it's 13 gifts will get you to 7.5, and another 21 gifts gets you 80% of the way there. So this is why it's really important to find out who are giving at the top tiers of your organization. Now, a campaign gift is pledged over a period of 5 years. So someone giving $100,000 is giving you 10,000, it's giving you 20,000 a year for 5 years. The nice thing about pledges is that you can take them to the bank, literally. There's a law known as promissory estoppel. I always love that term. Makes me feel so smart. So promissory estoppel literally says if a nonprofit organization is raising money and is dependent on that donor's pledge to accomplish their financial campaign goals, that is legal and binding. Um, I always like to point out way back in 2008, front page of the New York Times, top half of it showed Ted Turner running up the steps of the United Nations to renegotiate his gift. If any of you remember back then, I think Ted Turner pledged something like $10 billion or something like that to the United Nations. Well, they could call that pledge in. And so he was renegotiating it. And that's what usually happens. If someone has trouble with a pledge, they'll renegotiate it. But because of that, if you have a property that you want to conserve that has come up and you don't have the cash in yet, you literally can go to the bank and take out a loan against your pledges. And this is unique in capital campaigns. All right, moving on. So this is just shows you where the money comes from. So when we're looking at this, a good 80, 80%, comes from, the cabinet, your board, the feasibility study, lead, and major gifts. You get maybe 20, percent, 25%, and then 10% in the public phase. So your money, as we showed before, is all at the top of the pyramid, not at the bottom. And that's where you need to be focusing. So the timeline, about 2 to 3 months to prepare the case, qualify donors, confirm, the feasibility objectives, about a month or two to conduct the feasibility study. Since COVID, these feasibility interviews are all done via Zoom. The donors prefer them over Zoom because you're not coming into their house. We're not coming into their house. And a lot easier to schedule because we don't have to wait for them to come back from Nantucket or Florida or wherever they are. So it goes a lot quicker. And then the final months, we get the final report and pull everything together and kick off the feasibility reception. The key success factors to launching a campaign is a compelling case, donors willing to support it, and board and volunteers willing to ask. If you don't have those three elements, you don't have a campaign. So you really have to do the planning work well before launching into a campaign. I'm often asked whether or not I would do a campaign without doing a feasibility study. My unequivocal answer is no way. Absolutely not. Because the planning phase is so important to a successful campaign. The planning phase is also important to your organization because it helps you and every member on your board and some of your volunteers to really get your act together, catalyze over your vision and what you want to do, and begin laying the steps needed to succeed. So once the feasibility study is done, it's up to the board to proceed. We'll give its recommendation. A campaign must have a board resolution to move forward. A tentative or preliminary campaign goal is set. The campaign infrastructure and training is established, and a feasibility reception for participants in the campaign is held, and then the quiet phase of the campaign is launched. I want to speak for just a moment about the feasibility reception, or what I call the soft launch. My very first round of feasibility interviews as a consultant, I'm interviewing someone who literally says to me, Sharon, I do these feasibility interviews all the time. I never hear what the results are. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what a lost opportunity. So I started implementing what I call a feasibility reception. This is when you bring back every single person who participated in the feasibility study. It happens once your campaign is ready to launch. Your volunteers are trained. You've got your donor list. You've got your gift policies. You've got all the things Paul's about to talk about in place. And we invite everyone to do it either via Zoom or in person. It's really up to you. And we share the results of the study. We share the board's decision to embark on the campaign. We share how the case might have been changed and what some of the feedback was. And literally, in the audience, when you share some of the quotes, you see people in the audience shaking their heads. You share your preliminary goal. You share how much the board has committed, because every board member needs to make a commitment to the campaign. And a lot of times we'll solicit a lead gift. So if someone said, I'll give you $500,000, we get that gift in right away. And then we share how much we've raised to date. So it's great when you could say our campaign is for $2.5 million, and we're pleased to say we've already raised $750,000. And then literally the next day, you can begin soliciting your donors. That's the beauty of the soft launch for a campaign. So before I turn it over to Paul, any questions on anything? And Paul's going to be talking about how the campaign is set up and what you need to do to go move through the quiet phase and the public phase. But any questions on the feasibility setup and the pre-planning for the campaign? Yes, Jennifer. We do interview all the identified potential donors before we start the campaign. What you get is, so I'm interviewing someone, I'm like, so if this campaign moves forward, what do you think you might support? At what level? And they said, well, we'll give $100,000. Then, once the feasibility reception is, two volunteers go out to solicit, Paul. Let's say I was talking to Paul, and they know exactly how much to ask Paul for. because he already told you he might consider $100,000. So you go out and you ask him, and the beauty is, they are not yet committing, but we get a sense of how much they will give. And I usually ask for a range. I ask, what range might you consider? And they'll usually say, yeah, between 50 and 100, 25 to 50. You know, sometimes I'll get, I'd like to be, up in this upper range, or no, I'm going to be down at the lower range. So we get a sense of how much to ask them. What do you do for training? Very hands-on training. I'll let Paul handle that question in his part. What kind of response rate do you get and need when you ask donors to participate in a study? Great question, Jen.
Awesome question.
Awesome question, because the response rate tells us a lot about whether or not you can get into a campaign. We've had some campaigns where the response rate was so abysmal. We really kind of called and said, look, what's going on here, that your best donors are not getting back to you, are not, are not willing to be interviewed, are not willing to talk about this. Your best donors should be interested in your organization, and should be willing to to talk and participate them. Look, maybe 10 to 20% don't want to do that, and that's understandable. But with a strong organization, at least there's an 80% participation rate. And the interviews last 20 minutes. So that's what we tell every donor, is that the interview will be 20 minutes, so as to respect their time, and we can get that interview done in 20 minutes. I've had donors take an hour and a half because they just want to talk. And I'll never forget one of my first land trust campaigns. I was interviewing this donor at the chairman's house. She had set up the interviews for me. I don't do it this way anymore for this reason. She had set up the interviews for me back to back to back. And I'm in her living room interviewing this one donor. And the donor literally pointed to the top level of the campaign chart and said, I want to be your lead gift. I'm like, okay, that is awesome. And they actually added her as an afterthought. She wasn't even on their first round. And so then we're talking, and the chairman is popping her head in and out like, it's time, it's time. You've got another interview. I just ignored her, and I was with her. This donor was giving their lead gift. I wasn't about to cut it short. So that's why we usually allow at least an hour or two in between interviews, but we can get it done in 20 minutes. What would be your suggestion if your campaign support would likely come from areas outside of your communities and core donor base? I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me try this for an answer. Campaigns, there's a saying with campaigns. We have lots of sayings. Top down, inside out. The inside out is your core. So these have got to be the early supporters of your campaign. Your board members, your major donors who are currently giving to you. Campaigns succeed because they have momentum. You build momentum with people who are already giving to you. So you can't go to a donor you really don't know and say, we've got this great campaign, and the donor is going to say, well, how much have you raised to date? Well, we're going to new donors first. It's going to be, tell me how much your board has raised, tell me how much your existing donor has raised, and then I will jump on. So new donors don't want to be the first in, but they will get on board once they see the campaign is becoming successful. Well, thanks for your questions, and now I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks so much. Before I go off this slide, I do want to say something. The feasibility reception, I have to tell you, I didn't used to ever do one of these until I met Sharon, which just tells you development work. I think you have to be a constant learner. I really do. And I know Sharon would tell you we both are constantly looking at everything that we can to really inform us, and especially when we're working with different types of organizations. A hospital or a university will raise money different than a land trust, all right? The basic portions and the basic steps are still there, but there is little switches and little adjustments that we make as we go into different areas. And so Sharon showed me this, and let me tell you all, always have the feasibility reception. We just did we're in the middle of a campaign right now that we just got through doing in Connecticut. The goal was $15 million. We went to the feasibility reception and we came in with our lead gift of over $6 million. I'm sorry, of $6 million plus 100% board participation. And that thing just took off. And right now, at 15 million in less than 6 months, it's already over $8 million. So it is really a great momentum boost. And anybody who works in campaigns will tell you it's all about the big mo. It's about momentum. It's really trying to keep that going. So let me jump into some of the pieces I'm going to talk about. So campaign goals, these goals need to be set very intentionally, and they need to be confirmed, as Sharon said earlier, by the board, by the study that you've done. As you go into the study, it's going to tell you so much. And so you'll always hear me say, you need to have that feasibility study before you do it for this purpose. Don't set a goal that you can't achieve. You'll pay for it for years. And that's truthfully, it does happen because people are in there and you haven't been able to celebrate a success because you're constantly having this over you. I have to tell you, my organization, my company does some faith-based work, and we work in churches, and churches are notorious for going public too quickly and announcing it. You just can't stop a pastor or a rabbi or anything from sitting in their place and just wanting to tell everybody what they're doing it. And then you have, 4 years later, these people are going, aren't we done with it yet? Haven't we hit our goals? So remember that. Preliminary goals need to be set during the quiet phase, and they can be changed and increased up. And once you'll get in there, you'll see, gosh, we can add more to this. And by the way, I know we're talking about capital campaign goals, and capital campaigns, but understand there's a few different types of campaigns, right? You have your capital campaign. Sharon and I have both done what we call comprehensive campaigns, whereas we would build in the actual annual fund of the organization with it, if what we're building has to do with that and what we're going with. I've done endowment campaigns that we've done. So there are different campaigns, and many times Sharon and I will try to include little pieces of this in the campaigns that we're working at. Understand, in the quiet phase, nothing is public. Now, I know that can be confusing sometimes because you are talking to people, but what we're not doing is having this big push to everybody about the campaign. These are individual meetings for leadership gifts, individual meetings for leadership gifts. And then once we have to set the final goal before we go public. And that can be used and increased as a stretch goal. And as Sharon has said, we've done that many times in campaigns as you get in, because it really catches fire and it starts moving along. So that'll let you know about that. Let me go into the quiet phase if I could. The target in your quiet phase is for 80 to 85% of your funds to be raised. And these are coming from your larger donors. I like to call them leadership gifts that you have. And so you're looking at donors, and wherever that campaign is for you, if it's a large amount, leadership gifts might be $1 million plus. If it's just a $2 million goal that you're going after or something like that, it might be every gift over $50,000. That is decided as we go through this to decide where is that leadership. But we do that with personal solicitations and also with small receptions that we have. These are little house parties, if you would, of maybe 10 to 18 people that are there, so we can really follow up on that. And I'll go through that a little bit more because it can be very specific of what we try to do. And if you need kind of what our layout is for those receptions that we do. If you want to reach out to me, I can send that to you, all right? Quiet means you don't share your goal or how much you've raised to date, except for the people that you're asking to support you. If you go public too early, as I mentioned, your campaign won't achieve as much success as it could be. And you need to realize that this quiet phase can last different amounts of time. We've had them last as little as 8 months, and we've had some go as long as 2 years, depending on the campaign. In larger universities and hospital campaigns that Sharon and I have done, those campaigns where they're multi millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, a lot of times you'll take the first couple of years to do it. You'll see that in a lot of your universities, especially, that campaign goes on just for a little while. Okay, so just to let you know that piece of it. The campaign phases. I think we've gone over this a little bit already, but I want you to see as we go through it, you can go through and really right here is what, I'm sorry, I just pushed this forward. Let me try to go back. Up. I just goofed up, guys. Let me try to go back. There we go, right here. If you'll see where it says the top, as you're looking at the right, where it says feasibility study participant reception, that's where Sharon took us through all these phases right to that point already. And so we're talking about the quiet phase, and we're going to talk about the lead and major gifts are solicited as we go into this quiet phase. 80% of the campaign goal is achieved. And then you can see the campaign kicks off to the public phase to raise the remaining 20%. And then finally, you celebrate. Now, let me just say this. You need to have ways to celebrate your campaign all the way through. You'll need it as the leadership of this campaign. Your campaign committee will need it as part of this. And your donors who have been there will really want to be part of this, of what's going on and how we are celebrating these different areas. So these are your campaign phases as you look through them. Let me move on to the next one. Expectations of the board. As Sharon mentioned, we want to make sure when we have that feasibility study reception, that 100% of the board has given. That is so helpful as you go out. I have to tell you, before I became a consultant and since I've been one, probably in the top 3 questions I've ever been asked when I've gone out on a solicitation is, so what has your board done? It's going to come up. There's just no doubt about it. It always comes up. So you need to make sure that that's done. You need to address the questions. The board needs to address these questions that were raised during the study. And then they make those necessary changes in the case for support. And by the way, you'll hear those as you're going out. They'll just be something that someone who is so astute will come up with as you're in the middle of the ask. And as I like to always do, I like to just say, hey, Sharon, that is an excellent question. And here's what I'd like to do. Let me set an appointment for us to meet, and let me go back and get that information for you. I don't want to give you something that I've just, pulled out of the top of my head. Let me come back to you with that information. You need to set a reasonable preliminary campaign goal for the quiet phase. So if you're doing a $10 million or a campaign, or you're doing a $5 million, you want to make sure that you get to that 80%. So it might be 3 million out of the 5 million that you're wanting to do. Or for smaller ones, it might be that you want to get to 1.2 million of a $2 million campaign. Wherever it is, you want to make sure that you have what that number is and what you're trying to hit. Here's a place that we get to help a lot in, is to set the gift acceptance policies, a campaign budget, and support the building infrastructure to conduct the campaign. And also on that is also during this quiet phase, we have developed the campaign materials, which can take a little longer than you might think. But I want to go to the gift acceptance policies and just say something about that. When you put those together, it's really important because during a campaign, and especially with what you all are doing, uh, I've had people, how are we going to accept stock gifts? How are we going to accept gifts of land, right? How are we going to accept different gifts that come in that maybe you haven't had to deal with before? And so we want to set those policies. If you have any kind of a planned gift piece of it or whatever, how does that look for us? What do we need to make sure that we can count that as a gift for them? And what kind of proof or what kind of documentation do we need for that? So these gift acceptance policies are very important. And if you don't get those set in place, it can really come back to hurt you on the back end and make an uncomfortable situation possibly with your donors. The other expectation of the board is to solicit or help solicit donors to the campaign. So they're going to go out. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I get into the campaign committee. But the board, in the same way, we don't want to send them out on their own. We always do our solicitations in two. But really, a lot of it is during this time of the expectations of the board is to teach them exactly what their piece is in this when they go out. Right? That we don't need them to necessarily ask for the money. We just need them to share why they want to be part of this. And so we help craft that message. 3 to 4 minutes of this is why I'm part of this. This is why I'm doing it. All right. And by the way, we need to understand that because it's always good to have that peer-to-peer ask. Remember, we all get paid to ask for money, right? Or we have a position that tells, but that peer-to-peer ask, someone saying, hey, I'm just like you. And those are the most important words someone can say in a solicitation in that first piece. I'm just like you, and here's why I'm involved. And then finally, to introduce new people who might support the campaign. One of the questions that came up was about new people that came in that Sharon asked. I want to tell you real quick, just a quick story of a friend of mine from Atlanta. She was running a campaign there, and they were really stuck in their campaign. And all of a sudden, one of the board members said, well, I play golf with one of the founders of Home Depot, who unfortunately he just passed away last year. And he brought him in to the campaign and showed him they were doing a girls' camp outside Atlanta for young girls. And so the chairman, the founder came in and looked at what they were doing, everything, and fell in love with it. And they finished their campaign up in just a matter of 3 months because he brought in the people that he knew and they just were able to go to it. They caught lightning in a bottle. And Sharon will tell you, as I will, campaigns take all different shapes and forms. All right. And you don't know what will happen at every time. Yes, we try to have it planned out completely, but you can have something happen just like this that would go on for you. So just remember that it could happen for you. All right. Next one, role of the Capital Campaign Cabinet is to provide input on individual donors and the likelihood of their giving to help cultivate those donors and then to solicit donors. And now once they've been, but they solicit the donors once they've been cultivated. There never should be any cold calls that happen. And again, as I've mentioned, always in pairs. I want to let you know also at this point of the campaign, we always joke, it really becomes about list management. You're always going through the list, who's talking to who, what's going on, what's happening, and keeping that going is one of the reasons that Sharon and I, frankly, have jobs and we get to work is because we're constantly helping put that together and find out what's going on with the campaign and helping people really take stock of those people that are in those prospects that we have. So managing that list, but the campaign cabinet, I will say this to you, between the board and the campaign cabinet, these are two of the most important roles that we have in a campaign. And as these two positions go, so goes the campaign. If you have a strong campaign cabinet and if you have a strong board, your chances of it being a very successful campaign rise tremendously. Um, you know, you just have to have those people. And by the way, if you're going into this and you need something, I have job descriptions of all the roles in the cabinet. If you want to look at those and if you want to see those, just reach out to me on that. We
One
talked.
example,
Go ahead.
Goshen Land Trust did a campaign. This is pre-COVID, um, and the board decided to be the campaign cabinet. And so they took on that dual role. You know, they really wanted to acquire this piece of land, and it was kind of funny. Some of you might remember Barry. You know, they had to raise, I think, 650,000, and we set a goal of, I think, 8 or 900,000. And Barry calls me and goes, "We've got a problem. We've exceeded the goal. We've exceeded $1 million. What do we do?" But the entire board decided they would take on the role of the cabinet, and it worked great because they all put so much energy, and they managed to get the job done, I think, in 6 or 8 months.
That's good. It just changes. A campaign is great. You know, I go back to uh, um, gosh, I forgot his name. Good to Great. Uh, Jim Collins wrote the book. I was looking at my bookshelf. Jim Collins wrote the book Good to Great, and he talks about in that Good to Great, he says, you know, not only do you have to have everybody on the bus, but you have to have everybody in the right seat on the bus. And not only do they have to be in the right seat on the bus, you have to have the right person driving the bus. And not only do you have to have the right person driving the bus, but everybody on the bus has to agree with the person driving the bus that you're all going the right way. And that's why a campaign works. With board, with your committee, with donors, and with everybody, they're all focused on one point and on what they want to do. And so they work really well in that way. I went over this, so I'm not going to go over it again this week. I'm going to just look at it very quickly. But one of the things that I want to show you is as you go through this, and this is the campaign solicitation process, you can see that we have the research and consultation. That first cultivation, I want to let you know that's when you're having a conversation with the donor about what their interests are and what they need. Not many times do you actually have the ask there, but if that happens at that point, you can see that that gift can go into many different ways. It can go forward to a proposal. They could give a gift right there, or it can go to different areas, your annual campaign, public campaign. They might be an event sponsor, different ways. This is why a campaign, why we love campaigns. New donors, older donors, current donors that you have, those that have been lapsed donors, everybody loves to come in and be part of this. And if they aren't part of necessarily the campaign, it gives you a chance to talk to them about supporting your organization again. And so you get to have them there. I cannot tell you how many lapsed donors that we have brought back into a campaign that became current donors and great supporters of the organization of this. So this is why the cultivation piece and being so planned is so very, very important. And it helps you cover different types of gifts, right? And the one thing I do want to tell you though, is if you go in your cultivation and a person, and I've had this happen a few times, that the person will just tell me and they'll say, "Paul, you know what? I like what you guys do, but honestly, that's just not what my heart is and what my passion is. I don't care about land trust. I don't care about that part of it. You know, I'm really involved in helping to rescue dogs and cats or whatever it might be." And you know, and you honor that. You say, "I completely understand that. But you know, Aaron, can you tell me, you know, is there anybody that you know that might be interested in what they're doing that you can introduce us to?" And I've gotten some really great donors from that way. You know, "Paul, yes, I have a person that I go to at church and all he talks to me is about this stuff." And so it's been able to bring them on. So just to let you know, this solicitation process, although we are primarily going for the campaign, we are literally looking for donors in any way. All right, let me move on quickly. How important are naming opportunities? Major donors can expect them. I think the main thing that I want to tell you about this is It's not necessarily why donors give. There are some that are motivated by this, but it is absolutely a way to get the donor to increase the gift. They will increase the gift. We have it going right now. We're getting a lot of $25,000 donors, and we had our naming opportunity for rooms was at 35,000. So we were able to go back to them, and everybody said, yes, oh my goodness, I get a chance now to name something at that price. And so you can look at that. So naming opportunities can be helpful. It also makes giving a tribute or memorial gift much easier. They have a place that they can actually memorialize that person, that loved one, or whatever they're doing. And then major gifts. Go ahead, Sharon.
I was just going to say, and think of this from, your land trust perspective.
Yeah.
You can put a bench over a beautiful view looking onto a lake with the trees all around. You can name a tree, you can name a section of a trail, you can name an opening, you can name, an outcropping of rocks. There's so many different things that you can name with your land trust, so you need to think about and how to do that, because I think for land trust, there's just so many great opportunities.
I think it fits hand in glove with land trust because there is so much that you can do. It also helps you, by the way, to help with corporations and foundations at times, especially corporations will want to do that. And so naming opportunities are a great place to go through. I can tell you that when we do campaigns, one of the things we do is line those up and make sure that we have all those in place so you're ready and you have those on the ready. All right. How do you launch the public? When do you launch the public phase? When you have about 80% or more raised, and that you have already solicited your best major donor prospects. So those leadership gifts. So that's when you want to launch into it. And then what are the advantages of the public phase? Well, it increases, as Sharon told you earlier, a lot of these are given as pledges. And a lot of those other donors, those mid-range donors, will raise and increase their gift that they've been giving to you because this is the opportunity to do this. And so, so I've seen that happen many times, that your mid-range donors increase that gives. It adds new donors to the major donor pipeline. I want to just say this to you now, a little bit about the research and everything that we do. Again, because we're able to search in the way of finding affinity, capacity to this, and also the propensity to give. When we find those donors, it's a great way to bring in new donors because you do have sort of a, I guess we could say, a cause and effect. The donor gets to see exactly what their money's going to. A lot of times, and when you're just asking for funds for your annual fund, we give them an overall idea, but this is a very specific thing. Again, that Jim Collins, everybody is focused on the same area. And the campaign case will attract lapsed and non-donors that you've had. Smaller donors get a chance to come together and impact the campaign. There'll be many times in the public phase that will put a group together, and you can do that. And so as Sharon was talking about naming opportunities, what a wonderful way to say this trail is from this group that's come together. A lot of times what we'll do in this place is volunteers might come together, those that can't give a lot of money, but you will have this trail or this piece or this room was funded by the volunteers of your organization. It's a great way to do it. We did it at Butterfly Pavilion in Denver, and the volunteers got to all come together and put that. And then it just increases that participation. There's that old saying, Sharon, we know, that says misery loves company. We've changed it in campaigns. It's really success loves company. Donors that you didn't think were going to be involved and others that have maybe not heard of you, when you start doing a campaign, they get very excited about this. And so that success attracts them in. Methods of outreach. There's a bunch of different ones of these: calling programs, direct mail, ringless voicemail. You all have gotten that, where you've gotten a voicemail and you go, gosh, I didn't even hear the phone ring, and then it's an ad. We can do those now. Digital, you can see the different ways that you can do this. Your social media, texting to this. So there's a lot of different ways to do this outreach during the public phase. And then finally, these are the tips that we have for a successful campaign. Number one, recruit the very best leadership that you can find. Number two is conduct that feasibility planning study and follow that up with the reception. Focus on the top 10 gifts in the quiet phase. Develop appealing naming opportunities that can help you increase gift. And then you need to have a combination of staff and volunteer asking as you go out on these. So with that, I'll bring it into questions, and I'm going to stop sharing so we can have everybody come on up. And Sharon, I'm not looking.
Well, Andy says that that they would like the job descriptions.
Okay, Andy, if you'll just, I'm going to put my my email in the chat. I did it right. If you'll just reach out to me, I'll get it over to you when we get finished. Okay. Other questions that you might have. I know we went through that quick and we're right at the end of time, so I'm sorry we bumped up right to the end of it. But what else? What other questions do you have?
So let me ask you, how many of you, if you can raise your hand or, raise your little symbol, how many of you think you might explore a campaign in the next few years? Jennifer? Yeah. It feels like a decent way to maybe build some reserves and, get some funds inside
Hey,
that.
Jen asked this question. Do you address a donor's annual gift during the solicitation so that we're aware? Absolutely. Absolutely. You talk to them, and I would say if I was talking to Jennifer Frank and Jennifer had been giving us $20,000 a year, I would say to Jennifer, we are so excited and so thankful for the money that you've given us and that gift that you've given us, that you give us every year. And Jennifer, what we're coming for you now is coming to you to have this once in a lifetime opportunity to join with us to do this on top of what you're doing. And Jennifer, I know I always use what I call the assumptive close. Jennifer, I know that you understand that we still have to keep the place going, right? So we still need your annual gift that we have to have there. But, we'd really like for you to look at possibly a gift of 250,000 over 5 years and look at doing something like that. So yeah, there's different ways to do it, but yes, Jennifer, you do that. Hey, Pete.
Yeah, hello. Thank you. This was terrific. Remind me, I think you said it and I might have missed it. What percent of, okay, let's say you've got 100 people you've identified as possible contributors to this capital campaign at the quiet phase, major gift phase. What percent of those should be part of the feasibility study?
About 20 to 30. About 20 to 30 out of, if it's 100, about 20 to 30%.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to kind of, chuckle at Paul and say, yes, he goes through all of this. I basically, train, the solicitors to say, would like to ask you for a gift of $200,000. Oh yes, and this is on top of your annual gift.
Yeah.
Much more doable.
So I kind of do it a little bit, but it's good. But it's good. Yes. So that's what we do. And again, if you want, you have my email in there. If you have a question for Sharon, I can make sure that she gets that. But just reach out to us with this. I hope you'll look at a campaign. It is a great way to excite your donor base. Even if it's a smaller campaign that you want to do, sometimes Sharon and I will do these, and we almost call them donor initiatives that we do that. And so it is a great way, though, to bring people in. Yeah, Pete, what's up?
Just to share one last little factoid, I was part of a Land Trust Alliance new executive director Zoom a few months ago, and the question came up, can you use the capital campaign model to raise money for operating costs? And you had addressed that. a little bit by calling it something different. So there were some land trusts out west that had some success using the model of the capital campaign to raise money for staff salaries. So I'd share this with the group as a possible way. I had always been locked into the idea that no, a capital campaign needs to be for land or for capital, but I think there's a more expansive way to think about this as well.
There absolutely is. I mean, I did a campaign for land trust here in Connecticut, and we talked. A part of the campaign was dedicated to stewardship, and so we brought on. Part of the money was to bring on a land steward. And use the funds to ease him in for the first 3 years until the land trust would absorb that salary going onward. The same thing with an education person. So yeah, there are definitely ways that we can finagle that in. It just can't be blatant,
Yeah.
so you can't be blatantly raising money for operations.
Yeah. I think we have another question. Is it Walter? Did I say that right?
Yes, yes,
Look at
correct.
me. I'm
Yes,
so proud of myself. I noticed
Thank
Sharon
you.
didn't fall on you, right?
Very good. Yeah, I'm from the Warren Land Trust, and I have a follow-up question. We are in the middle of a campaign, and of course, once you acquire land, there is always cost involved in maintaining the land. How best to set ourselves up to follow up after the campaign?
So what
Sharon,
I
can
like
I-
to do with that is actually add different components to your campaign. So one component will be, reserves for land acquisition. Another will be ongoing stewardship, a stewardship reserve, because you've got to now take care of that land in perpetuity, and that works really well with land trust donors because they understand that concept. So it is building reserves, not so much endowment.
Yeah,
And I applaud raising money for endowment, but let's face it, if you have an endowment, you can only spend, the interest, 4 or 5%
5%.
on the
Yeah.
principal. Where if you set it up as board designated reserves to be used for stewardship, land acquisition, whatever it might be, it's a great way of addressing that issue.
Walter, do you know, I have a saying that I use, and I don't go into any campaign where I don't try to have in a couple of years of operating costs into it. We do that a lot, add that into it, especially for something like this. But I have a saying that I say that I can get you into any building, keeping you there is the real challenge, right? That's a great question, and everybody needs to have that in mind, because whether it's, we have one campaign that we're working on that we're doing that they're trying to bring on an executive director, right? That they've never had one. So they're going to build that into the campaign. Well, that's not just a 1 year deal, right? That's got to be there. So yeah, looking at that.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Any other questions? I know we're a little bit over, but I appreciate everyone staying on. We just want to make sure we can get anything. And obviously, you can reach out to Sharon or I or both of us if you'd like. We are so happy to answer your questions. And if not, with that, Aaron, I think it's back to you to close it all up in our final one.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Paul, and thank you, Sharon. This has been a great series. We're so thrilled to have been able to partner with you on this. I certainly learned a lot listening in. I'm sure others did too. So thank you all. Again, we'll have some resources to follow up with everybody who registered. Sounds like we can send out that job description, among other things. And again, thank you all. Looking forward to seeing you at a future CLCC program.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.